Welcome all to the MGH brain-PBM clinic rounds. Today is March 12th, 2021, and I'm actually having the great pleasure of welcoming Margaret Naeser, a PhD and a research professor at Boston University, that will talk about a case of CTE and photobiomodulation. The title is Transcranial Photobiomodulation for former football players suspected of developing CTE. Thank you, Marnie, for being here. Please take it away.
Oh, thank you, Paolo. It's a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me. I'm happy to share some of our information. We have done 4 cases, but we're going to really mainly talk about one, our first one. So I'll just move along. There is some imaging along the way. Oh, I have to share my disclosures, I think. So anyway, in the last 12 months, the V-Light company in Toronto has been funding my research lab, but I don't have any personal financial conflict of interest, and neither does Paula Martin or my co in my lab. And so these are just telling you they're non-significant risk devices we've been using, or in the V-Light devices, they're low risk devices, FDA category, general wellness, no medical claims made. As I said, I'll just spend a few minutes in the beginning to make sure everybody understands our rationale for using the red and near infrared LEDs on the head to help with TBI or possible CTE, etc. And the issue is that you have this generic cell, and in the cell, you have these mitochondria. They're not in the nucleus, but they're floating around in the cell. And the mitochondria have to make ATP so that the cell has energy to work with. And it turns out that in this mitochondrial membrane here, you can see it's greatly magnified because it's coming from here. You have this last complex here called cytochrome C oxidase. And cytochrome C oxidase is a photoacceptor, and it will take in photons, light particles of various wavelengths, particularly though the red ones. And there's another bump here for the near infrared ones. So we're going to be working with those wavelengths, primarily near infrared, because actually the 810 will go deeper, a centimeter or 2, than the red, which sort of is only going to get maybe a millimeter or something. Now, this is a slide from Mike Hamlin's lab that does explain more how this works, so we think. And here's recording in progress. Here's the basic mitochondrion. And when it's a stressed cell, low on oxygen, hypoxic, etc., the cytochrome C oxidase, which I showed you here in the mitochondrial membrane, is clogged up with this normal, a physiological reaction. It just gets clogged up with nitric oxide. And it just hangs. It's really an amazing thing. And there's poor respiration in the cell and low ATP production. But as soon as the red or near infrared light is basically exposed to this cytochrome C oxidase, the nitric oxide is immediately sent outside. Oops, let's go back here. Outside the mitochondrion, and it's outside the cell wall. And this nitric oxide is actually going to promote vasodilation. And that's a wonderful thing because we can target where we want all this. So then the cytochrome C oxidase is free to utilize oxygen, and you're going to increase respiration and ATP production, which is very important for the cells. These cells can go on for years and years. It's unbelievable. They're not dead. They're just not functioning well. And anyway, this whole concept explains why normal cells and tissues don't generally respond, but they will a little bit, but not nearly to the degree that a hypoxic cell will respond. Especially those that are at risk of death respond very well. The effects continue for a long time after the light switched off. And the nitric oxide will temporarily increase blood flow. I'll show you some slides on that. And it will also dilate the lymphatic vessels, which is extremely important, and I think a wonderful opportunity for us to work with the football players and dementia cases, because those lymphatics in the brain, which we've only known about for about 5 years, are in the dura mater. And I can show you slides that we're pretty sure we're delivering photons down the midline. And then you have to bear in mind that mitochondria, see, here's your basic cell body and of the neuron. And then you have these mitochondria, they look green here, and they're floating around, but they will travel down the axons. And this becomes extremely important to us when we are working with traumatic brain injury or these football players where they get a lot of not only cortical damage, but there's going to be damage in the white matter as well. This is showing you promotion of cerebral blood flow. This is a severe TBI case. This is done in Japan. He's a severe and he's in a vegetative state. But the issue is, and these are just the catheters they have in their ventricular peritoneal shunts. But anyway, they put the near infrared LEDs just on the forehead. That's all they did was the forehead. And this is the SPECT scan, single photon emission tomography. It's just for blood flow. And so they treated, for something like 7 months. And the SPECT scan was taken 30 minutes after the treatment, the one out here. And you can see there's increased blood flow here. But only on this particular side, even both sides were treated. I don't know if there's too much encephalomalacia or what is over here. So in any event, these images are flipped. So this is the left side and you do have increase in blood flow. This was a very severe TBI case, vegetative state. And all this did was sort of wake him up enough so he could try to pull out the trach, which doesn't make life better for the nurses, but never mind. So at least we showed we can promote vasodilation. Some of the other effects are anti-inflammatory. This is extremely important when you're dealing with traumatic brain injury, and I'm sure with the cases coming along who are suspected of CTE. You can probably view these. Do you record these so people can view the slides later, Paolo? Are they able to see these? Anyway.
Yes, it is recorded.
Oh, that's good. So they can see it later. There's a very good paper I highly recommend on the anti-inflammatory effects of the red and near-infrared light. Mike Hamlin wrote in 2017. It's very, very good. And also there's going to be antioxidant effects. And the most, when a cell is initially exposed to the red or near-infrared light, there is a brief burst of reactive oxygen species, but it doesn't last long. And that's going to turn on nuclear factor kappa B. You don't have to pay much attention to all these details, but that will promote gene transcription. And you get wonderful antioxidant effect from the mitochondrial superoxide dismutase. That's really important. And then another one that's really important for brain and brain health is heat shock protein 70. Your brain can just make it. And that actually helps the, when there's DNA and replication, the telomeres at the end of those strands don't fray as much. So it's considered to be somewhat anti-aging. And that would be very important, especially, for doing research with aging or certainly with the TBI cases or the football players. You want to do everything you can to try to keep this brain as healthy as possible. Also in Mike Hamlin's work, he's shown that low-level laser therapy would be the same for LEDs, increases brain-derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF, and even synaptogenesis, will promote synaptogenesis. And so we don't have to get into the details of all of that, but the brain-derived neurotrophic factor will promote new neurons, neurogenesis. It's something to keep in mind. And then synaptogenesis will help with the synapses where the cells, axons and dendrites come together. So those are very good things to keep in mind, all the benefits. So now we're moving on to the material from the case reports my office did for the IBIA meeting, International Brain Injury Association in Toronto in 2019. And these are all my wonderful co-authors on this. We now, as I said, we have 4 football players. So now we're finishing up writing the paper. It's been quite a long process. So I have to introduce you to what is CTE before we can get into our case. So I just spend a few minutes on that. The chronic traumatic encephalopathy, always abbreviated CTE, is a progressive neurodegenerative disease, and it's associated with repetitive head impacts, or RHI. So clearly the football players are going to, qualify for this, but ice hockey also. And there's a variety of other sports, rugby, that are pretty dangerous, actually. So what happens with this disease? Well, there's this phosphorylated tau, which is an abnormal protein. They'll abbreviate it p-tau, which is going to build up. And it's particularly going to be close to blood vessels. And it starts out in the frontal lobes, because you think of the football players, they're leading with their heads, at least they were 35 years ago when the cases are coming to me now, when nobody knew that much about this when they were playing football. But these deposits, the phosphorylated tau, are positioned very deep in the sulci. Here's the gyrus and here's the sulcus. Now that's between the gyri. And so you get these deposits, they're around blood vessels, and they start out not too many. And you can only diagnose this, by the way, after the patient has died and you're at postmortem and you see the brain. And you can look under the microscope, et cetera. And then you can see even at stage 2, there's 4 stages, it's even worse. You can count even more of these abnormal protein deposits. Okay, so what is the manifestation of this in terms of behavior for these football players? Well, unfortunately, they have 3 categories. They have 3 major symptom categories. One is behavioral disturbance, which usually actually comes on earlier. That's part of it. And they have emotional outbursts and impulsivity, and they cannot control these emotional outbursts. And that's the first complaint we get when they come in our office and they say, well, we try to find out what the problem is. And they said, I can't control my temper. And their whole family really suffers. Sometimes the wives come with them and they can corroborate that, because they just can't stop it. And then they have a mood disturbance and they're depressed, and they have cognitive impairment. They have problems with memory, multitasking, making decisions, and it's really hard for them. And they know that there's 4 stages. And I mean, in the end, it's terrible. It's, just as bad or worse than Alzheimer's disease. And they can have to be in a nursing home and that sort of thing. So stage 1 is just this frontal lobe involvement in the deep sulci. You have those phosphorylated tau deposits there, dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. You can see this is the brain. For those of you, if there's anybody who doesn't know the way around, but anyway, this is the front, and this is the frontal lobes and the parietal lobes and the temporal lobes and the cerebellum, et cetera, and motor and sensory cortex. So you're getting this bang, 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 leading with your head in football. And then you have also orbitofrontal, sort of, just above the eyes. And then you have the locus coeruleus in the brainstem. These are where the first deposits show up. And the locus coeruleus has very rich connections with the hippocampus, important for memory. So you can see we're already off to making all these connections in the brain, and it's just going to go downhill. And then this is stage 2, it's even worse. So it's frontal lobes, parietal lobes, temporal lobes, and more in the brainstem, et cetera. Stage 3, it's in a lot more places now. And it's interesting because it's so sad. The motor and the sensory cortex are the last to go. So here's this person with all this mental deterioration, but still walking. And it's very difficult to control them, really. And then in stage 4, it's just everywhere. So these are slides that come from the Boston University Center for Traumatic Encephalopathy, the BUCTE Center. So we're finally to our first case. All right, and you can ask questions all along. It's fine. I'm happy to stop and talk about that. So he played for the Canadian Football League. When he came, he was 65 years old to us. He had played football for 14 years, and he started at age 10. All of this is bad because now at the BUCTE Center, they suggest you don't start till age 12. And anybody who's played greater than 11 years of full contact football is potentially going to be in trouble. I mean, not everybody gets this, maybe 10% of players or something, but they have this sort of cutoff if you play more than 11 years. Those are the ones they usually see at postmortem, that kind of thing. All right, this is a very intelligent person. He has a PhD in exercise physiology, which he obtained after his football career. He taught in college and coached football in college. Then when he started having problems mentally, he switched to high school. And then he did that for a while. And then he absolutely had to even stop that. He played the position of middle linebacker. All right, so that's defense. He's very famous in Utah, really, especially at Brigham Young University, big football program. And he's the greatest defensive player in history at BYU. And so anyway, he was he was a fantastic football player, but now he's in trouble. And it took 4 to 10 years of cognitive decline by the time he really started getting tested and whatnot. When he came to our office, he said that he had been told by more than one doctor that, and he'd been tested by neuropsychologists, that he was probably heading towards CTE. But nobody's going to diagnose that until postmortem. So this is what we did working with him, and he was our first treatment. He was our first patient. He ended up getting 2 different LED treatment series, and I'll be going through those with you. The first series is in the office, and the whole head is going to be treated. You can see this is a 2-inch diameter LED cluster head. And it has red, 9 red, and I don't know what is 52 near infrared. And so we're going to do both wavelengths. And they're only 500 milliwatts. They don't heat up. It's painless, non-invasive, and so on. And we're going to treat the whole head. And he's just going to sit there. We're going to have 2 sets, A and B, and we're going to use 6 of these at a time because that's how we could be set up. And it was 20 minutes per set. And it's 26 joules per cm square if you want to know anything about the details of it. Now, here we were, hopeful that we could help him. And because all we had was data from traumatic brain injured cases, those would be, car accidents, that sort of thing. But here we have a football player. Well, he came to us with his primary complaint is PTSD. And I don't know if you all are familiar with the PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder checklist civilian, but the maximum would be 85 points, and that's really bad. And he came in at a score of something like 58. That's really high for a civilian to score that high. Usually they score at 37 if they're a civilian or higher with PTSD, but he's way up here. Lots of anger issues and emotional outbursts and so on. So I'll show you how to read these graphs because you'll see them over and over. This is pre-treatment. And then these parallel lines here show that he's going to get 18 treatments, Monday, Wednesday, Friday for 6 weeks. That's our standard schedule. We do every 48 hours during the week. Then we have no treatment period and we test. Okay, so this is 1 week after the 18th treatment. And you can see, wow, he really dropped. Look at this, 30 points on the post-traumatic stress list test for civilians. The checklist for civilians. And so he's happy, his wife is happy, everybody's happy. He comes back 1 month later per our protocol, and maybe a little bit's coming back. But then he comes back 2 months later, and this is not good. He's not happy, his wife is not happy, everybody's upset. Well, he has a progressive neurodegenerative disease. And we learned that unless you keep treating, you can't get a handle on this. So just keep that in mind. That's why we're going to do a second series, but that's going to be done at home. That's going to be up to him. So also the same pattern for depression on the Beck depression inventory. So he comes in with this depression. Then we treat Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 6 weeks. Then we stop. Now we test it 1 week. Oh, good. Not complaining about being depressed anymore, even at 1 month after that. But then at 2 months starts to come back. Now we also, of course, are testing for cognition. And he did really well on the Stroop color word interference test. I don't know if you're familiar with that. The letters RED are printed in green ink. Okay. And sometimes you're supposed to read the word, and sometimes you're supposed to say the color of the ink. And that gets difficult. It's called, and it's trial 4 is very difficult. It's inhibition switching, and they keep moving back and forth on how to do that, how to answer. And so he did great in the beginning. I mean, look at this, -1 to almost a +1 on just inhibition, but inhibition switching. So he's happy, everybody's happy. And then 1 month starts to go down, 2 months is definitely going down. So I'll tell you what we did next, but first I want to show you the brain imaging. It's not that complicated. He lies in the scanner and he looks ahead at this white dot on a black screen and just lies there. He doesn't move. He doesn't say anything. He doesn't have to perform a task, nothing. It's called resting state functional connectivity MRI. And so we're going to get all this data for different parts in the left hemisphere regions of interest and the right hemisphere regions of interest. It's all going to be cortical and gray matter. And then we're going to also find out what is connecting between the left side and the right side of his brain. And when you look at these pictures, you can just look at this bottom sort of larger triangle here, because the one on the top is just a mirror image, so you don't have to deal with that. And when you see the lower, the blues here, these blue colors, that's not great because that means there's low functional connectivity. So while he was just lying there resting, there wasn't much going on in his brain and he really couldn't even make good connections. So this is within the left hemisphere, which isn't quite so bad, but this is the right hemisphere to the left hemisphere, box 2. That doesn't look so good. And then here is just the right hemisphere. So this is all what it looks like pre-treatment, and parts of the brain are not talking to each other. That's probably the easiest way to get it across. And so now the next, now we're going to treat, this heavy line says, okay, we're going to treat Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 6 weeks. Now this is 1 week after the 18th treatment. And now we're seeing more correlations within the left hemisphere itself, because we're seeing some orange and red here, even up to 0.8 correlations of communication between parts of the brain. Okay, and then also between the right hemisphere and left hemisphere, and then within the right hemisphere by itself. So that's good. And that was when we were getting really good behavior testing. Remember, we're at 1 week. PTSD is down, less depression, better executive function. Now we're at 1 month. We do this again, and things are still pretty good in the left hemisphere, both hemispheres, right hemisphere. And then at 3 months, he comes back, and now he's having more problems again, because we know his problems started back in around 2 months on the testing. And now you see a lot more low correlations. So now we have to say, what are we going to do? Before I get to his second treatment series, I wanted to show you what happens with car accident cases. These are not football players or anything like that. These are just motor vehicle accidents. And we did a study with Ross Safon at Spalding Rehab Hospital, and we had 11 mild traumatic brain injury cases. And these are the results here just for PTSD. And 4 of those 11 car accident cases did have PTSD. Now, this is the same chart setup I showed you before. This is the PTSD checklist civilian version. And you can see these 4 were above 37 for civilians in their score pre-treatment. So they had symptoms for PTSD for sure. And one of them was, again, military. Oh, my grade. I mean, above 57. Amazing. But look what happens. So then we treat Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 6 weeks. And then 1 week after the 18th treatment, it's coming down. It's amazing. And this one came way down. This one stayed the same, but then he came down 1 month later and stayed very much, much under control at 2 months. And this was a younger woman. She was like 19 or 20. And she was doing so well. When she came back at 1 week, she saw no reason to come back for more testing. So we never saw her again. But the issue is the scores come down and they stay down. Now, these are regular, I call them average TBI cases. This is not what we saw in football. And so these are the neurocognitive test results for those 11 car accident cases. And again, this is the Stroop test, color word interference test. And so you test them pre-treatment. It's below average. 0 would be average here, 50th percentile, and they're almost a standard deviation below. And then you treat, then you stop treating, and then 1 week after you stop treating, they're as a group, they're average. And 1 month later, they're getting even better, and we're not treating them anymore. And then at 2 months, it's basically stabilizing. And so overall, it's very significant, P equals 0.04. Same for inhibition switching on the Stroop color word interference test. So we don't see these people anymore. And this is California Verbal Learning Test, long delay free recall. You hear 16 words several times. And then 20 minutes later, you ask, well, can you tell me what those 16 words were? And they all improved. I mean, they actually, at 2 months after the last treatment, they got up to 50th percentile as a group. So that was all very encouraging for your car accident cases. But remember, now we've got this football player, and at 2 months later, things are falling apart. So we're now going to use, let me just get some water here. We're going to use a different LED device. And it's still the same football player. And this is going to be his second series. And he's starting at 3 months after the last treatment in the helmet. In the whole head treatment. He wasn't treated with the helmet. It was all over the head, though. And this device is very special because it's going to only treat basically 5 cortical nodes in the default mode network. And I'm going to explain the default mode network for a minute. This is a very, very important network that you can see where they're located. So there's mesial prefrontal cortex, which is right here, high forehead. That's mesial prefrontal cortex. And then the second node is back here. It's called precuneus. And that's this point right here. Now, these two are the most important nodes in this default mode network, just labeled default mode network. You can think of it as by default, very simple. And these two nodes must always be in perfect harmonic temporal coherence. They must oscillate at the same rate. And they're very slow. It can be 0.01 to 0.08 cycles per second. Is really slow. And it's damaged easily with head trauma. Bang, 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 as in football players or car accident even. In normal people, this mesial prefrontal cortex is very well connected to the high parietal precuneus. And when you're sleeping, boy, this is really active. The default mode networks are really active. And even when you're daydreaming, it's in control. You're just zoning out. But when you need to think and attend to a task, this network, this default mode network, especially the midline structures, must downregulate. They must come down together, beautifully together, to allow the dorsolateral frontal cortex to come up for cognition and especially executive function, decision-making, multitasking, all of that. But that's not going to happen if these two nodes, cortical nodes of the default mode network, are not communicating well. So what we're going to do is work with a near-infrared device. These are near-infrared diodes that are only going to treat simultaneously this mesial prefrontal cortex and the high parietal precuneus. There are 2 other cortical nodes which we do treat because they're part of the default mode network, and it's left angular gyrus or intraparietal sulcus. You don't have to carry on about that, and on the right as well, but they're above it. This area is above and behind the ear. This is where the diode is. This is just electrical wiring and things back here. So this is our target for that. Now, there's something that's, well, first of all, I should tell you that the default mode network, in this device, we're going to deliver 810 nanometer near infrared photons, and they're going to go deeper. And we're sure they're getting in the brain because we have all kinds of MRIs and changes to show that these photons are getting in there. We think pretty much where they're being targeted. I mean, I know that they're going to spread, and there's no question about that. But we're going to assume that most of them the majority are going to get where they're going. They've done lots of studies with cadaver brains and lasers and LEDs and near-infrared light, showing that you can deliver these photons in at least a centimeter to get to surface brain cortex. Now, the default mode network is dysregulated. In other words, this front is not talking to this back here. in so many central nervous system disorders. It's really unbelievable. I mean, it's in traumatic brain injury, PTSD, depression, chronic pain, opioid addiction, Alzheimer's disease, aging, autism, and Down syndrome, and there are others. So it's really a very, very critical and important network. And the fifth place in it is there's a diode placed in the nose, this intranasal, that's going to deliver photons directly, we think, to the olfactory bulbs, sense of smell, which is basically behind the eyebrows here, is up through the nose, and on the orbitofrontal area down in here. But the olfactory bulbs have direct connections to the hippocampal complex and the parahippocampal gyrus. So you're going to deliver these photons via the nose indirectly to medial temporal lobe. It's really hard to get there otherwise. I mean, it's kind of hard. And so that should help with memory. Now, the other thing that's really special about this particular device, this neurogamma device, is yes, it's going to treat the cortical nodes of this default mode network, but it's going to be pulsed, and it's going to be pulsed at 40 hertz. And by the way, I forgot to mention that this mesial prefrontal cortex diode right here at the top of the forehead, very easy to find. According to Rakel, who's this famous guru on PET scans and everything for decades, this area right here, mesial prefrontal cortex, is the most demanding for glucose and energy. So you can see why, if this becomes dysfunctional or dysregulated, it's going to throw off a lot of the default mode network and then other networks that are supposed to follow in line, central executive network, things like that. All right, so now we're going to pulse this though. These lights are going to be pulsed at 40 pulses per second. And why do we want to do that? Well, there was this paper from MIT done with mice who have genetically engineered to have Alzheimer's disease. And they pulsed white light in a darkened room, 40 pulses per second, 1 hour a day, 7 days, sacrifice the mouse. And then you look in the brain. And what they found out was they got a 60% reduction in this amyloid beta, these abnormal protein deposits that was in the back of the brain, at the occipital cortex, because the light went through the eyes. But they got a reduction in tau. Remember, phosphorylated tau, it might be a little different in CTE, but it's still a form of tau. They got reduction there too. So we want to be pulsing these lights at 40 hertz because we have this idea, maybe we can help reduce the buildup of tau. So that's why that's going on. And they figured out that the microglia responded to the gamma, meaning 40 pulses per second, to create greater phagocytosis of their ability to have phagocytosis, which means they can wrap around these abnormal deposits and then get them, the waste product, removed. So that's that story. And so now we're still going to treat the default mode network with this Phelate Neuro gamma pulsed at 40 hertz. And this is just a lot of detail, and you can look at this later about exactly how to find these placements, because you do want to be accurate in where you put the placements. Okay, and then the player also got a red intranasal, an extra one of those, because the neurogamma is all near infrared. It's no red there. And we wanted them to have red wavelengths too. And there's been a study that shows that that increases melatonin. So he bought a red LED also for the nose. There's a lot of good things you can do with that. We want to talk, if you want to talk about COVID, supposedly, because it's going in the nose and COVID's inhaled, the SARS-CoV-2 virus is inhaled through the upper respiratory tract. They did a study in Stockholm, Sweden. Karolinska Institute, nitric oxide kills coronavirus. So I know that our football player told me he went back to Los Angeles after he was treated here. And he was the only one, he and his wife were the only ones, and all their neighbors and friends, he never got COVID because he and his wife were using the red LED in the nose. But that's just a side story. Now, here's his data. Now this is going to show you the series 1, which was in the office and at home. Now this is PTSD, basically the checklist, and lower scores would mean less PTSD symptoms. So this is, you've seen these data already. This is when he was treated the whole head, red, near infrared, coming in at 57, very high. And then 1 week after the 18th treatment is below 27. And then we test him again, 1 month up, starting a little bit up. And then by 2 months, you know, he's having rage reactions again. So then he gets this neurogamma. He's going to take it home. He's going to treat just the same schedule, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, every 48 hours for 3 months. This time it's 12 weeks. And then he comes back and he's going to use the red intranasal, and the PTSD is gone again. So he's delivered enough, I think, photons basically to the default mode network. And I think he's re-regulated that. And he continues to do this 3 years later. And he's so excited, he's really something to meet, that he has moved from Los Angeles to Salt Lake City. And he set up 2 research programs using this neurogamma device with football programs at the University of Utah in Salt Lake City and Brigham Young University in Provo, Utah. So, I mean, talk about a patient. What a success story. He is one happy person, and he's been working really hard, and I'm in touch with those people too, our offices. So here's with his depression, what happened there. He started out with a moderate depression, and then 1 week later is down to 0, and 1 month later, but 2 months later starts to come back. So then he does the default mode network, because we know that's dysregulated in depression, quote unquote. And then after 3 months of that, he's doing well with that. And as I said, he's been treating now at home for 3 years, and he is really happy to keep doing it. And I'll tell you later a little bit more about what I think might be going on. So quickly, this is again the color word interference test, the Stroop inhibition measure of executive function. And so he improved when he treated the whole head, then he got worse when you didn't treat for 2 months, then he got better when you just treated the default mode network and for 12 weeks. So this is finally a significant improvement by 2 standard deviations, because when he started, it was a standard deviation below average, and now it's a standard deviation above. And this is his pain scores. Yeah, the patients come in and they have a lot of pain too. You know, the football players, oh my goodness. So anyway, here's the whole head, and the pain goes down. The pain goes down at 1 month, and okay, maybe not so bad at 2 months, and then it's really gone as long as he keeps treating, because that default mode network is dysregulated in chronic pain. And then his sleep improved, which is very, very important. We don't have to get into that here, but he did much better in his sleep. And we see that patient after patient comes back and says, oh, my sleep is so much better. Thank you so much. And now we finally have one more resting state functional connectivity MRI scan on him. It didn't go back to the way it was right at 1 week or 1 month after the 18th treatment in the office, but it does appear that he has more functional connectivity, particularly in the left hemisphere. You see this triangle's left hemisphere. And so that might have been enough to get him going, because it did improve so much on the cognitive testing. Now, second player. Did anybody have any questions on the first player? I don't know if they wanted to. We can ask questions.
I do have a question, actually. Thank you. By the way, it's a fascinating case. What struck me about this case is that this player had 2 fairly different treatments. First of all, the MEDX, large surface, fairly low irradiance, and then the VLite neuro with small surfaces with actually high irradiance. And you can actually see from the trajectory of the symptoms that in the second phase of treatment, you actually get to an improvement that is probably greater. Although I understand that the connectivity didn't quite get back to what were the previous improvements. So I guess the question is, what do you think? Do you think that this is just the overall over time improvements that add up, and that's why you get to an even greater response? Or do you think that says something about the paradigm that you should use in these cases of either CTE or TBI, rather high irradiance and less surface, as opposed to low irradiance and large surface?
I don't know that I have an answer for that. The irradiance on the, on the V-Light Neuro Gamma is, it is 100 milliwatts per cm square. Yeah, it is, because it's 100 milliwatt. And the posterior frame, there is 100 milliwatts. It was only 44 milliwatts per cm square, yeah, with the medics. And that would be if you had used the 1000 milliwatt LED cluster head on medics. But when we treated him, we only had 500 milliwatt. It was 22.2 milliwatt per cm square irradiance. So that was very weak, but he was getting that all over the head. So somehow something worked. So I don't really know. We've never done a sort of quote unquote head-to-head comparison.
We don't have comparison between the two devices, unfortunately.
No.
And it is, I mean, that's a difficult question. We don't know.
We don't know.
But, you know, it would be a good thing to eventually compare the devices. But the main thing is one can be taken home and used at home. And the other one is really expensive and probably not really that portable to use at home. So, you know, you're also trading off in that sense.
Marnie, I have a question. It's James.
Yes. James, nice to see you. Long time no see. Okay.
Yeah, we're not traveling much, I'm afraid, so I haven't been around. So.
Oh, okay.
Your side, but later this year, I'll be back.
Oh, good.
In any other trauma, like post-operative trauma, soft tissue injuries, if we treat it, then it heals and it gets better and it stays better.
Mm-hmm.
Why does is that true at all for TBI, CTE?
Don't mix those two. They are completely different. It's very true for regular average car accident TBI, as we saw out to 2 months. They stayed. They got better and they stayed, and they even got better at 2 months later. No treatments in between. But the CTE cases, the ones that we have followed out that we can get them to come back, yeah, they start to fall off about 2 months. This is a progressive neurodegenerative disease.
Yes, but it's different. Obviously, I'd expect that in Alzheimer's disease or
that's Alzheimer's. And Anita Altmar showed that too. That as soon as you stop treating, they fall off.
And we've seen that even with primary progressive aphasia. It's another neurodegenerative disease, and the treatment effects fall off. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So degenerative diseases associated with aging we know in other diseases, osteoarthritis and other macular degeneration. I mean, they always come, you treat them, symptoms go away, they come back. We expect that with degenerative diseases. We wouldn't expect it with traumatic based injuries. I'm wondering what it is that about TBI and CTE that means that they don't actually heal. Well,
they do with TBI. See, they seem to with TBI. I mean, I don't follow them beyond 2 months later. I don't know, but you can't equate repetitive head impacts with these football players, and they are estimated to have endured thousands of subconcussive hits. That's another different ballgame.
Yeah, I think so.
And that's why. Like, I guess I should move. I mean, I'm happy to answer questions at the end, but I don't remember time.
So it's the difference between repetitive head injury versus a single or maybe even 2 or 3 head injuries that are maybe not even from the same type of, say, sport or, trauma. So that's just what we're finding is that they're very different things.
Right. And sorry,
anyway,
Marnie.
I have to disappear at the top of the hour, so I'm looking forward to what you can get in the next 10 minutes.
Okay. I guess the only other thing is there are some, because I do follow these patients for a long time, sometimes years, and some of them do traumatic brain injuries, and they may have had multiple, but not like football players, 2, 3, 4 over their lifetime. But some of them do require ongoing treatment, and they fall off when they stop as well. So I'm not sure why that is, but it's hard to predict.
And they may be on their way to CTE too. there are people who have only had 1 or 2 TBIs. They're in the literature, and then they die, and oh look, we got hyperphosphorylated tau all over the place here. So that can happen too, just along the way. Okay, thank you. That's why we actually suggest, if they can, just go buy your own NeuroGamma and use it for life. I mean, something like that, or something, if they can afford it and all that sort of thing. And they have the self-discipline. Okay, this is just the second. This is my other half player. This is going to go fairly fast. He came to us at age 57, played 16 years of football, but he started at age 14, so he has that going for him. And he has a college degree. He played in the NFL 8 years. That's a lot of years in the NFL. So he comes, and again, they estimate thousands of subconcussive hits in these football players. Bang, bang, bang. But he also had terrible pain in his right shoulder. He had 15 surgeries in various parts of his body, all during his 8 years of football. And he came on 3 pain medications, including 2 narcotics. All right. And then he qualified on cognitive testing. And here we have James. Hi. This is the Thor helmet. And we use that with this particular football player. And we have this beautiful helmet that James and his engineers built for us. And on the inside, we have these individual red, near-infrared mixed LED cluster heads. So we can go right down the midline here and treat the whole mid-sagittal suture line, as well as mesial prefrontal cortex and high parietal precuneus. And then we can treat the left and the right sides of the head. We have to do 2 sets. We're again doing basically 26 joules per cm square per LED cluster head. Okay, now let's see. Again, we'll start with PTSD. That's their big complaint when they come in. And so here he is before we do any of these near-infrared treatments on his head. And I mean, he's above military grade PTSD too. He's like 66 or something. And then we treat in the office Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 6 weeks, and it plummets, And so now it's down 40 points almost. And then 1 month later, it's still pretty good, but he's wise to this situation. And he says, thank you. I'm not coming back to be tested anymore. I am going to get my own V-Light NeuroGamma and treat at home. Goodbye. And that was it. He did that. And he has kept in touch with us on email. He's very good about that. And he keeps telling me it's wonderful. Thank you very much. So he's very happy with it. But he doesn't want to come back. And I'll tell you, this is the problem with trying to treat CTE. They all have legal suits against the NFL. And they're expecting money from the NFL, especially their wives are expecting money from the NFL. So maybe they shouldn't let people know they're getting better. Now, in my opinion, they've already suffered enough, so why should that affect their legal suit? But who am I? Nobody. So they're very much in fear of what the NFL would do to them regarding their legal suits. But in reality, the NFL has settled very few of those suits. 5%, maybe 10%, and they have many suits. So anyway, that's just something to keep in mind. Same story here with his depression. Here he has some depression, and then that goes down, and that even goes further at 1 month, but not coming back for more treatments, but tells me he's doing well. California verbal learning test, 16 words. And at 1 month, it was 2 standard deviations above what it was when he came into the study, which was -2. So 0.5 there. And then long delay free recall, that's very, very difficult, 20 minutes later. And it's, 1.5 standard deviation improvement. California verbal learning test, total over trials, verbal learning, so it's significant there. This is the 2 slides I want to show you particularly for this patient. His results showed that he had reduced pain and he discontinued both narcotics medications. When he came in, his VAS pain score was 7 out of 10. We don't take him at 8. We won't take anybody over the 7 because that's going to affect cognition. And then he comes back 1 week after the 18th treatment, it's only 3. Man, he's happy. So then he comes back 1 month after that, after the 18th treatment in the office with the helmet, and now it's 5.5. However, at that time, he discontinued both of his narcotics. He's not using any narcotics medications. They were oxymorphone and variations on that. And then he obtained his own neurogamma, as I said, and he went off and treating himself at home. And all we hear is, I'm doing great, thank you very much. But if you go to the literature, you'll find out default mode networks is dysregulated in chronic pain and in even opioid addiction. So he was able to get out of it and then continue to treat at home. I don't know what would happen if he stopped treating at home. I think he might have problems, because we're into a progressive degenerative situation, I think. And miraculously for him, after he used this helmet, his tinnitus went way down. It basically was cut in half. And he was very happy about that. But we didn't understand, why did that improve? We didn't really know about that. But there's this paper from Japan, and you can see these white arrows over here. They treated the stellate ganglion in the neck. And with our Thor helmet, we're sure that these, if the red LEDs are showing you red photons on the sides of the neck, the near infrared is there too. And so we're probably treating the stellate ganglion in the neck. It's pretty deep, actually. It's this yellow right here. It's just in front of the vertebral artery, so it's pretty deep to get to. But they had fantastic results in Japan. Severe tinnitus. The before score was 78, and after 3 months of treatment, it's 4. So we only treated, 18 treatments in 6 weeks, but there's potential there for treating tinnitus. And then just here quickly, MR spectroscopy study. I don't know that you all would know much about that, but it's a certain MRI sequence, and you have to pick one region pretty much at a time in the brain that you want to study. So you have to make a decision. And we study anterior cingulate cortex. We also studied posterior. But we got these really interesting data for anterior cingulate cortex. This is a different player. He's I'm only going to show you 2 slides on him. He was 55 years old. He played tackle. He played 15 years. He started at age 7. That's not in his favor, starting that young. So here's pre-TLED. This NAA is this N-acetyl aspartate. It's really important. It's going to be the strongest signal when you want to do spectroscopy through MRI. And it's a neural marker. It's a neural marker. Who could ask for anything more? It's only within the body of the neural cells and within axons and dendrites. And it's synthesized in mitochondria, our favorite structure to treat, of neural cells. Concentration correlates with oxygen consumption. So here he is with his baseline for N-acetyl aspartate. Now here he is 1 week after the 18 treatments, and now that's increased. And his behavior at that time, you'll remember, is PTSD. Oh, I haven't showed you his data yet, but anyway, he behaved like everybody else. And especially his pain went away. And then here's 6 weeks later, his NAA is still holding up. But look what happens at 12 weeks, it's down. And this is when his symptoms start to come back too, especially pain. Okay, here you go. Here is short form McGill Pain Questionnaire. It's parallel to his NAA values. So he has pain here. It's not that great, 10, that's not so high. And then you treat, and then 1 week later, oh, good, no pain. 6 weeks later, no pain, but he's got high NAA levels there. And then at 12 weeks, 3 months later, it's coming up. So then he treats at home and it goes down. But I don't have any NAA data for you after 12 weeks of home treatments because of COVID. We had to stop doing our scans. And again, this patient had good results for his PTSD. In the beginning, it's bad. And then at 1 week, it's down, it's good. And then at 12 weeks, it's coming back up. And then he treats at home and it comes back down. So he has the same pattern that the other patient did, the first football player who could then treat at home. And I think that home treatment is going to be the way to go with these progressive neurodegenerative diseases. And this is a group study showing the 4 football players. They all improved in PTSD, and it's a significant reduction with only 4 cases, significant reduction in PTSD, Beck depression, pain, McGill pain, and then Pittsburgh sleep quality. Their sleep quality became much better. So here's it at the end. What do we think happened? We probably had increased ATP production in the compromised cells. There was probably less inflammation, maybe increased brain BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or some synaptogenesis from synaptogen. Probably focal vasodilation in blood vessels. probably improved resting state functional connectivity. I'm going to show a few more slides. Increase in NAA in specific cortical areas. And this is the most important that I want to get to, is focal vasodilation in lymphatic vessels. Because if you can dilate the lymphatic vessels, you have a chance to take out the p-tau, phosphorylated tau. You have a chance to remove that. And they did do a study with some Alzheimer's disease mice, and they got more beta amyloid taken out. We are also delivering, I think, photons to actually the dura mater, which is, by the way, where the lymphatic vessels are located, is in the dura mater. And that's because, thanks to Mary Dyson, we learned about emissary veins, and this is from Gray's Anatomy. And there are veins that are on the surface of your scalp that actually tunnel through bone into dura mater, and then also supply the surface cortex area through the arachnoid and pia mater. And these are valveless veins. They can slosh back and forth, back and forth. So they can take these photons in to where they can be delivered deeper. And this is a very special MRI sequence. It's again a coronal frontal cut. And what you can see is these tiny little lymphatic vessels. They're so tight, they're like a millimeter. So can you imagine that they could also be damaged, even though they're in the dura mater, in football players? Because again, you're going bang, bang, bang. And so if we can vasodilate the lymphatic vessels in these football players 30 years later, maybe we can remove more phosphorylated tau. And I like to acknowledge all of my wonderful collaborators and co-investigators. And Paula Martin is actually on the call today, so you can ask her questions also. And so that's it. Are we done? Oh, good. It's just 1 o'clock. Good, more or less.
Thank you so much, Marnie. It was phenomenal cases on football players and the overall presentation. Very intriguing. I think we are out of time. And I would suggest that maybe if there is one quick question, like a 1-minute question, otherwise we'll adjourn. Alrighty, I think everybody is ecstatic. Thank you again for coming, all of you, today. And to be continued, I believe next week is Linda Chow's presentation.
Oh, she's April. I was told. Is that sweet? No, it's not April yet.
Well, we'll actually follow through anyway. Take care.
Okay, thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you for inviting us. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. People can send me email if they have questions.
Absolutely.
That's okay too. All right, thank you.